Good evening from New York. I am Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Journeys, Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us. I just want to acknowledge the passing of one of our sisters, a daughter of Guyana's soil, Dr. Faith Harding. She was more than a friend to me. She was a counselor and a teacher and a mentor. And to some of us who were fortunate to have gotten close to her, we consider her our sister. We are back, and the gentleman next to me is Clinton Orling. Clinton, good evening and welcome to CWS Journeys.
Good evening, Selwyn, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Clinton, tell us, who is this articulate, well-groomed and passionate young man we have come to know as Clinton Orling?
Well, Clinton Orling, I grew up in this neighborhood where I am right now doing this interview. It's considered one of the most depressed areas in Guyana. It's called Tiger Bay. My early childhood years I spent here. Then I moved on to Friendship on the East Bank. And then I moved back to Georgetown. But this time I lived in Rock Street for a bit. And for the past 16 years, I've been in Tiger Bay. I call this area my home. My father started the German's restaurant. It's a famous restaurant in Guyana. I'm sure most of your listeners might know of German's. We've been around for over 50 years. And it's a family, third generation family restaurant, which we've managed to expand and continue to manage here in Guyana successfully. After my childhood, I went to numerous high schools, culminating with sixth form at Queen's College. Then I went on to the University of Guyana, where I studied. I started doing the civil engineering program. I wanted to be a civil engineer, but it was a full-time program. My dad passed away when I was in my first year of the civil engineering program. And then I had, just 19 years old, I had the responsibilities now to run and manage the two Germans restaurant, which he had started. So I had to switch academic courses from civil engineering, and I went to one which accommodated my schedule more. So I went over to the social sciences, and I did international relations. Mm-hmm. From the University of Guyana, I went on to the University of West Indies and continued within the same field, which is global studies. I have a deep interest for all things global. I consider myself a global citizen to this day. I tell people I think global all the time. Borders are just imaginary lines that divide people. But I still see myself as a citizen of the world first, more than anything else. Identify myself as a very, very proud Guyanese. I'm still here. I'll remain here. Here's my foundation. And here's my piece. So then that's just in a capsule who I am and where I come from.
When I want to go to your early childhood, having mentioned that you grew up in Tiger Bay. What was that like for you at the age of 9? Were you there at the age of 9?
No, at the age of 9, I was back in Rock Street.
Rock Street. Well,
yeah, most of my
how old were you when you left Tiger Bay?
I left Tiger Bay, I was around 6, 7.
6 or 7, okay.
Yeah, 6, 7 when I left. The thing is, that's what I wanted to say, I don't have a lot of memories of this area.
Okay.
Of Tiger Bay. Yeah, I don't have a lot of memories of it, but I always knew that Tiger Bay was one of the more economically challenged neighborhoods in the country.
When you think of Guyana, what comes to mind?
When I think of Guyana, I think of I see a country with enormous opportunities. Mm-hmm. Even today, it is a country of enormous opportunities. I see it as a country where I want to live. But there's lots of challenges that the country still has to overcome. And those challenges are currently they're enormous. And those same challenges push people away from Guyana, push people from remaining here. And there's a statistics that says, and this is all anecdotal, it's not empirical, but I think we say here in Guyana, more Guyanese live outside of Guyana than in Guyana. And that is something that has to change, and I think it has to change. A lot of it has to do with public policy.
If you were not a business owner and a civil society leader, what do you think your career would be, Clinton?
I'll tell you, if I probably wasn't a business owner, if I didn't inherit the restaurant when I was 19 and had to manage the restaurant, I think I probably would have been like most young people now in Guyana. There's this sense where lots of folks are looking to go overseas. And if I tell you I opened by saying I'm a citizen of the world first, I probably would have been overseas. But the restaurant being my foundation has permitted me to stay here, and not just to stay here and be a successful entrepreneur, but also to look at areas and avenues where I can give back. Because I have this belief that if you have the influence and if you have success, you also have that concomitant obligation to give back to society. You spoke about if I wasn't involved in civil society, but being from the business foundation, that led me into getting involved in civil. And it started really at the volunteering for the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce some 10 years ago. If you continue, well, I remember when I just finished University again in 2004, and I used to read, all the newspapers around that time, even during my entire student days at the University of Guyana. And one time, I always admired those editorials that Starbrook News would write. And I thought one person wrote all those editorials. I was so naive then, and I remember writing to David DeCaries, who was the managing editor at the time, and the owner of Starbrook News. And I said, David, I wrote him and I said, I admire the depth and the substance of these editorials, and I'm impressed, and I want to congratulate you. And then he responded to me, he said, no, he don't write them all. It's a rotating position where different writers would contribute. And David actually said to me then, he said, look, you should start to contribute to the letter pages of Starbrook News. And he encouraged me to get involved into civil society work and contributing and having a voice. And I remember I sent my first letter to the editor sometime in 2004. And then David became like a mentor to me. And I remember in 2005, I think it was, I wrote close to 200 letters to the editor in 1 year. And then I eventually became a columnist for Starbrook News. And from then on, I started to see the effect where people were listening and responding to some of the things I was writing and saying then. And I said, I have a bigger responsibility now to take it from just writing to the newspapers exclusively, and to take the same level of enthusiasm and transfer it into a formal organized institution. At the time, the Chamber of Commerce appealed to me, the private sector organization, because I was already a private sector lead in terms of my restaurant. And so I got involved in 2005 with the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. From there, after 6 years, as a member, I eventually became the president of that organization. Just last year, after 2 consecutive terms as president, constitutionally I couldn't run a third term consecutively. So I moved on. But after stepping down from as the head of the Chamber of Commerce, I remember always looking at young people and young people issues. I was very vocal. I was a very vocal president of the Chamber. And I commented a lot on social, political, all issues affecting the private sector. And I always said, you can't look at the private sector in isolation. Folks see the heads of those organizations and they say, these guys are only concerned about their own self-interest and profits. That's not true. Because the private sector is almost like the center of society. The private sector creates employment. The private sector creates growth within the country. The private sector, when it's strong and it's successful, there's more currency, there's more cash in the society. It helps to spur development. Almost everything that we do and almost every issue you can think of, the private sector is involved. So when we advocated, or when I advocated as president, I touched on different sectors of society. And I remember my term being, I was engaged with different civil society groups, as opposed to just all dealing exclusively with private sector direct issue. Because every other issue that we dealt with, whether it was on crime, whether it was on suicide, whether it was on health or some social issue, all that came back to affect our private sector. So
well, let me ask you this: when you became president, what was your vision for the organization?
When I became president, the first goal for me was to expand the organization, get more young people involved in business, and get more smaller business owners involved within the process. Because I believe strongly, and I believed it then, and I still do now, that advocacy is a strong tool for social change. So getting smaller businesses who make up the majority of Guyana's private sector on board, because traditionally the chamber was seen as this elitist organization where just a few. Even my own entry, it took me over a year to get into the chamber. So I wanted to make that process easy. We started there, and then I also wanted to touch on
why though, Clinton? Why did it take you so long?
Oh, because it was an old boys club. And it was tough to get in. I remember applying, and the application wasn't even looked at. I think I got in after, in 2006, we had done a major renovation or reconceptualization of the German's restaurant. I remember inviting heads of the chamber to come to the opening event. And they came, we had a big launch. And then I think the next day, I received my approval for my
Did you, by the end of your tenure, were you successful in accomplishing that vision, that goal?
Oh yeah. We had some opposition in terms of me amending. I actually amended the Constitution to allow for a new category of members, where the fees, the annual dues were less. The requirements wasn't the same as the other levels of membership. Very successful in that. The only disappointment was lots of the smaller businesses aren't as organized as they should be. Mm-hmm. And some of them, a lot of them did not take up the opportunity, but it's still available. We had expanded membership. And under my tenure as head of the chamber, we had a pretty successful run in terms of advocacy, in terms of activities. We did more activities in my 2 years than 3-4 years combined, the previous 3-4 years.
So what was most satisfying for you during your tenure?
Most satisfying was the advocacy. Mm-hmm. Definitely taking the chamber from not complete obscurity, but just from some obscurity, and it became a household name, not just domestically, but regionally. I remember when I first started, we did capacity building training, and my first event when the first week I became the president, 4 persons turned up to the first event we had. And afterwards, we had 200 people full in the Pegasus. We were talking about getting big venues to host these capacity building seminars.
If I may ask you this, the first event, only 4 people showed up.
Yeah.
And you're in leadership. You have courage, obviously. What inspired you to hold another event, having had such a dismal attendance the first time?
I'm a perpetual optimist, Selwyn. Mm-hmm. I believe in hope. I don't give up easily. The reflection of what I see outside, even if there's despair in any environment, even though I live in Tiger Bay, you look out, you might see poor infrastructure. So, but I still, within my own community, I still see opportunities here. It's the same kind of attitude that I took when it came to the Chamber of Commerce. A belief that I can change the circumstance and change the system if we just made a few different tweaks.
I can't help noticing when you mentioned how you got in the strategy you employed, and you got into the Chamber of Commerce, and eventually you became the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and that's commendable. But what did you learn there that you were able to apply to your business?
Well, the Chamber, there's many opportunities to learn. I think my business didn't benefit much from my membership of the Chamber, specifically. I think Guyana and the society, the Guyanese society, benefited more from my involvement at the Chamber. It's some of the programs that we pursued that benefited the wider private sector. Some of the areas over 2 years, we met with almost all civil society groups. And all this was done pro bono. It's all volunteerism. Being the president is not a paid position. So I would say, and advocating at the highest level in terms of policy, the presidents, the prime ministers, opposition leaders, international, the donor community. I think those were national contributions, and I think the nation, the country benefited more from my involvement than my business per se. I remember people would even tell me, because I was so engaged, people would say, you spend a lot of time with the Chamber, do you have time for your own business?
Why may I ask, why did you spend so much time? Why were you so committed?
Because for me, it's an obligation. Every day we have a choice. Every day we wake up, we have a choice. We can either accept our circumstances the way they are, or we can take action and do something to change our current circumstances.
Clinton,
we have that choice every day.
If you don't mind, I would like to arc back to your early childhood, because one of the things I like to do on this show, I always consider everyone a gem with many facets, and oftentimes there are only one or two facets that are exposed, and people form an opinion from that. So what I like to do on the show is to twist the gem a little and expose the other facets. So I want to go back to your early childhood when you were, let's say, 16. What was life like for you?
I'll be honest. I was the average regular teenager. Really and truly, it was all about mostly socializing around that time.
A lot of socializing?
I socialized a lot, but education, I always remember education being important for me. I always excelled at all my exams and so forth. I always remember telling friends when I was younger, when I was around 16, 17, I always told them, don't follow me in terms of the social things that we do. I used to go to parties and so forth. I probably was a troublemaker in school, but I always said to them, I knew when to focus, and I always took education seriously. So
where did that come from? Where did that come from? That understanding it is important to focus at a certain time. Well, let me ask you the question this way. How would you say your parents influenced who you are today?
To this day, when people ask me who's my biggest role model, I tell people my father. His story, and the story of Germans in itself is an amazing story. He grew up in Tiger Bay. He lived in Tiger Bay. He started a restaurant from scratch in Tiger Bay, and it became a national institution. So his own story, and he was also the type that really gave back to the people of the Tiger Bay community. And he was well respected for that. Everybody had a problem, they came to Germans. Every afternoon, he always shared out, if there was food left over from the restaurant, he always shared it out to the members of the community, something which we still continue to this day. So I always say, and he also instilled on me and my brothers and sister, again, that look, even though he owns a restaurant, he wanted us to focus on our education so that we can so that we can go out and create our own lives, and not to just look and depend exclusively on the restaurant or what he has done to live on his legacy exclusively, but to create our own legacy. And he always expounded that education is important.
Clinton, from your perspective, in retrospect, with your experience, your awareness of how things work. You're a businessman yourself, and you were the head of a chamber of commerce, the president, to be exact. When you think of upon your dad, how would you characterize an individual who grew up in a distressed neighborhood? And what do you believe was the driving force that made him not only open the restaurant, but was also compassionate, that he gave back to the community? How would you describe it? How would you describe this guy to us?
I describe him. Look, it all starts with roots. You develop strong roots, and then the ROUTS that you create, and you can create bigger opportunities for others. I think a lot of it, Selwyn, it's innate, and having that empathy towards people. To subscribe again, I come back to this, subscribing to something much greater than yourself. He was successful both financially, and he still saw it as very critical and important to help those in the community and help those around. And that is a big takeaway that really rubbed off on me. His motivations for doing so, I think a lot of it it comes naturally to some people.
Right.
To some people, it's also maybe the circumstances. I think for my father, it could be circumstances, knowing where he came from. He didn't come from much. So when he had achieved, I think he felt, or he understood the pain that folks who don't have a lot, some of the challenges that they would go through. So I think for him, it was important to, once he was in a position to help and give back, he did so. And I really think people, lots of people who become successful, a lot of them start to focus on just success per se, and not looking at the bigger picture where there's a society in which you live in and you can't really isolate yourself. And if that society is broken, your perceived security, just focusing on your own individual need, is very tenuous and at any time can shatter. So it's important for those who achieve some level of financial, economic success to really look beyond themselves or beyond their immediate environment and focus a lot on a more holistic and broader picture of society. And I think once you're in that position, you can help. You do it. For me, sometimes everybody asks me, like, why do you volunteer? Why do you do all that? Now I'm doing the Ghana Football Federation, heading that. It's all volunteer. I don't even get paid for that. And I spend almost 6 hours a day on dealing with the Ghana football situation.
Clinton, what is the one thing about you that you would like young people to come away with whenever they meet you or they think about you? What is the one thing?
I always tell people, in our training sessions, I tell folks leadership is simple. How we define leadership, anybody can be a leader. And I inspire by saying, or I say always, leadership is about getting work done. Leadership is not anything magical. And everyone can be a leader. Not all authority figures are leaders. Because you got people in authority who hold titles and status and so forth, but they aren't leaders. And I always say, once you're willing to put in work to change a situation, that's leadership at play. If it means even just going, if there's a little problem in your community and people dump and get garbage in front of your space, if you get up every day and you decide to just clean in front of your parapet, that's you demonstrating leadership. And if you go to the wider community, to your neighbor next, and then the entire community, and say, look, we need some strategies to address garbage. Let's do it. So leadership, I want people to take away from me that a lot of the success that I have had didn't come overnight. A lot of it came by hard work. And leadership is about putting in work. And the more work and the harder you work, I think your odds and your chances of succeeding is amplified, and that goes for everything that you do, even if the way you pursue your education, your academic pursuits, your restaurant, your civil society group. your sports agency, whatever it is you do.
Mm-hmm.
Your success, a lot of your success will come if you're willing to put in the time.
Clinton, you mentioned the parties and the hanging out and having a regular young guy or young man social life, yet you're able to focus and so on. Who was Clinton at 21?
Clinton, and you picked the age where I started to change a lot. When my dad died at 19, when I was only 19 and had to run, I was suddenly thrown into this world where I had a staff of 40 people, all older than me. And then there was this pressure to continue the family legacy, which at the time was about 40 years in operation. So at 19, I resisted the responsibility because I was happy with going to the parties after classes and just hanging out with friends and being carefree. This is my college years, you know. But then I had to step up to lead in and manage in the restaurants and still go to school at the same time. I didn't quit school, so I continued to do both simultaneously. So at 20, I remember 21. I started to change a lot in terms of how I viewed life. I moved away from hanging out as much as I did. I remember my first 2 years at university, I got a couple of C's thrown in there, C grades. And my final 2 years went from 21, moving up, I remember, 16 A's or something to that effect. I really ended with a flurry. And that's my maturity was starting to kick in terms of how I viewed what was important. And I said, look, I need to focus on my education. I need to focus on my business more and
so,
not distractions.
And so what was the defining moment? You were ambivalent about taking on this responsibility, but then it happened.
I'll tell you what, Selwyn, and this might sound frivolous to people, it actually came through music. I remember listening to some music, and music really inspired me.
Wow.
And, and I remember listening to some songs, some new music I started to listen to, and then I said, you know what, this was inspiring stuff, which made me feel that I can do anything. The possibilities are endless. And then I said, I need to buckle down and stop focusing on the superficial stuff and transfer to the more substantial stuff.
If you were to eavesdrop your parents telling a stranger about you, what do you think they would say? How do you think they will describe you?
They'll say definitely he's a hardworking, he's intelligent. I'm going to say intelligent, smart in the sense that I pick things up, subtle things, or what we call common sense. Has a high common sense.
Quotient.
I'm very social. I'm very social.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a social person, and I have a heart of gold in which I really can pass people who's in any sort of trouble or any distress. I always feel almost daily it's an obligation to help those who can't help themselves. And I think that's how they will describe me. And as I get older now, I think my parents will describe me now, this Clinton, or like they tell you things that used to motivate me, like achievements and financial gain, financial success. I don't measure that. That's not as important to me now.
Mm-hmm.
I think living a more substantive life appeals more to me now as I get older.
When did you first, would you say, and I promise I'm going to move away from this facet after this.
No problem.
When did you first realize that you had leadership skills?
In high school.
High school.
In high school, I remember always, I always used to be, they used to call, he's a popular kid in high school. I always used to be popular in high school. And then I had teachers who used to tell me, Mr. Erling, you're like a natural leader, but there's two sides to you. I was a troublemaker then. So they used to tell me, you can actually be good, or you can guide people down the wrong path.
Is that so?
Yeah. And a leader, every day, a leader is faced with those two choices.
Yes.
Whether he decides to to use whatever, not if it's a natural ability or any ability that they have, do good for the majority, or they can.
Well, what keeps you grounded, Clinton? With all this achievement, all these achievements, what keeps you grounded? What do you think it is that keeps you grounded?
I genuinely think it's something innate,
Mm-hmm.
That realization that I have to give more to the less fortunate.
Right.
People. Yeah, and it's an innate something that you can't. It's difficult, very difficult to explain, but it feels almost like an obligation to me to give back to my immediate community here in Tiger Bay, and to give back nationally to my country. And it's just there, right? Sometimes I even question, even if I decide, and I can tell you now, Selwyn, I say, tomorrow I'll change course. I'll focus exclusively on private sector pursuits to try to become maybe one of the richest Guyanese. I can guarantee you that within a day or two, I'm back to doing most of my volunteering stuff and helping people out, which some might call a distraction from those other goals.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have my two beautiful kids, and they also inspire me.
How did that change you, or how did fatherhood change you, or affect you?
Oh yeah, it was a big change, because now here I had more responsibilities, and I had responsibilities to two younger persons directly connected to me. I was a father, to be honest, when I was younger, even young, from a young age. Now that I have my two sons, now they're 7 and 9, and they really now they're coming into their own, and they engage me, and I encourage engagement.
Uh-huh.
I always say, if I can't justify something, and even everything in life, even with my customers, if I can't justify a rule that we have at a restaurant, logically it's not a rule. So now my kids, the same thing. I don't just tell my sons, do this because I said so. I tell them to do it. If I can't justify it, then they can ask me why, or I can't answer that why. So it's great to see them, even in their own immersion as young men, analytical, questioning, that kind of open mind.
I'm gonna take a quick break, but on that note, I'm gonna leave this question with you.
All right.
Your organization, the Blue Caps, that deals with young people. When we come back, I want to know what inspired it, and if you apply this particular principle of engaging or allowing people or encouraging people to challenge you, or to challenge a particular doctrine or policy or whatever. All right? Okay, so I'll take a break.